Because if you're the person that's at the edge, if you're the person that's defining new standards, creating new versions of yourself, then you're most likely to fall off if you're at the edge. This is the visual I like to hold in my head. If we're building a building, a skyscraper, you're the person laying the next brick right at the top, right at the edge, then you're the one that is creating the opportunities for everyone come behind you, right? The electricians coming in doing the first fix, there's people doing other things. You've created the environment which is safe for others to move into, to hold that standard that they're holding. But you're the person that's laying the next brick on top. And so you're on the edge. And so you're creating, but you're also most likely to fall off because you're right on the edge of that. Now, it's a place that you want to be, I believe, as a leader, to set that standard and create. But you also want to have an emotional safety in it, if you will.
Listener, another fantastic episode with Nick Davies today. He, by the way, if you don't know Nick is a Tony Robbins-trained coach, over 20 years of experience in corporate world. Nick has a sweet spot that he really over delivers for high achieving financial advisors. So if you're in the wealth management sector, I think you're really going to get a lot of value from this conversation. If you're not, I think you'll still get a lot of value. He's lived in 3 different continents, 5 different locations. He has a lot of extensive training, over 3,500 hours of coaching different business owners and people and entrepreneurs. And he talks about standards in this episode. He talks about results focused. We talk a little bit about coaching and consulting and strategy mindsets. We go in different places that I believe that you as a listener, if you're running a business, you will get value from this conversation. So get ready for another great episode on the Better Than Rich show with Nick Davies. Get ready, strap in, here we go. And welcome back to the Better Than Rich show. I'm your host today, Mike Abramowitz, and I'm here with Nick Davies. Nick, welcome to the Better Than Rich show, brother.
Thank you, sir. Excited to be here. Excited to dive in today. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. I know we're in a mastermind group together, and I could listen to you speak all the time because you have this beautiful accent that makes you sound even more intelligent than you actually are. So I'm jealous of that sometimes. So I will tell you, we have a lot in common. We're going to go in a lot of different places in this conversation, especially after the listener heard your bio about working with Tony Robbins for over 20 years. And I've been a follower and a crew member and really done a lot of work with him. And one of the things that I learned through my UPW experiences, my Date with Destiny experience, and bringing dozens of people to his events is that life responds to what we expect of it. And what we expect of it is typically our standards. And if we don't have any standards that we're willing to live by, then we're willing to fall to other people's standards. And I think that's true in life. And I think that's true in business. So one of the things that I've been riffing on recently is boundaries and communication guidelines. And how do we live within these boundaries and what it means to create these? And, you could change out the word boundaries or standards. So I'd like to just have you just start with that. If I'm listening to this show, why are standards important? How do I create them? If I don't have them, how do I audit my standards? If I'm wavering sometimes, whether it's I'm wavering with my kids and parenting, I'm wavering with my staff, I'm wavering with my clients. I know I said I want this, but I'm not being sturdy in my approach to leadership. And I'm not honoring those standards. So I'd love to hear you just start there and riff on this and see what shows up for you, Coach Nick.
Oh, such a cool frame. Thank you so much, Mike. There's so much to tie into the Tony stuff here for sure. The standards, why are they important to start off with? It's because the standards of our life define the quality of our life. Or if you want to change your life, change your standards. And so what does that actually mean on a practical basis is what you tolerate. And we talk, there's a book behind you we were talking about earlier, but there's a quote from that book is, we get what we tolerate. And it's to say that whatever standard we have in our life is what is the baseline of what we'll get to. If we say that we don't like something in our life, then we get to choose to change it or not. Otherwise, we get what we tolerate. And so that's the baseline of what we think about, how we should think about what a standard is. So at any given place in your life, you think about, okay, what is it I like or don't like about that? If there's something you don't like about it, it's there because the standard you've got is one that you're tolerating, not one that you actually want. So that's the first piece to think about. Any place of your life, you can take that through. And I said, well, what's the baseline way to think about how I should hold the tension in my mind about this area of standards in my life? And if I think about my corporate experience working in leadership all over the world, I often encountered a high standard of delivery, a high standard of expectation from people that are working around with me. And that's great. It's important because it says, okay, we deliver a high level of work, a high level of productivity. We want to have that standard. And through my coaching journey, what I've discovered that is if you've got to have that high standard of delivery, which is execution, keeping it tight, being efficient, you must have a high standard of compassion for yourself as well. This is the starting point. This is what I believe the starting point is. Because if you're the person that's at the edge, if you're the person that's defining new standards, creating new versions of yourself, then you're most likely to fall off if you're at the edge. This is the visual I like to hold in my head, Mike, is that if we're building a building, a skyscraper, and you're the person laying the next brick right at the top, right at the edge, then you're the one that is creating the opportunities for everyone coming behind you, right? The electricians coming in doing the first fix, there's people doing other things. You've created the environment which is safe for others to move into, to hold that standard that they're holding. But you're the person that's laying the next brick on top. And so you're on the edge. And so you're creating, but you're also most likely to fall off because you're right on the edge of that. Now, it's a place that you want to be, I believe, as a leader, to set that standard and create. But you also want to have an emotional safety in it, if you will. So if you think about that skyscraper visual, oftentimes right at the top, they have this actual physical net. So if things fall off the top, it catches it rather than going all the way to the bottom. And I believe the standard we need to hold for ourselves as a starting point is that high level of compassion. So that emotional safety net, that if we're pushing, we might fall off a little bit, but it's okay because we want to make sure that we can bounce back rather than go on the way to the ground and smash ourselves in the floor. So the starting standard is we want to have a high standard for execution, completion of things, but also a high standard for compassion for ourselves. And that really is the starting point to doing that, because then it gives you freedom to set the high standards. Like that tension always has to be in place.
It's a great response, and it's also triggers more curiosities for me that I want to park here for a moment, because we also know that standards are important. We also know that life responds to the questions that we ask of it. So what I would be curious on is, what are the questions that you would invite a listener to ask themselves to help them audit their current standards, or to question their current standards, or if they don't have them at all, like how to create some of these in their life and also for their business? What are some of those questions that pop up for you that a listener right now could like grab out their pen and their journal and maybe write these as prompts for themselves to explore? And then if you feel compelled to, I'd love to see what some of your responses might be to some of these questions, so that way you can give them a little bit of a framework. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, I believe that journaling is a great way of being in dialogue with yourself, and so I love the starting point of doing that. Everyone's different for what is most important and what standards are most important for them. So we can make this very tactile and very specific in terms of how you can apply that right now. The question you first want to ask for yourself is, what do I want? What do I want? And that is the fundamental question, because most people can't answer that question. They often don't ask it of themselves. They're not well practiced and can't answer it very well. Because if you ask most people what they want, they'll tell you what they don't want. So that would be the first question. And if you're challenged with an answer from that, because it might be too general, I want more, or I don't want this, right? Back to the get what you tolerate. Then the next question would be, okay, well, lay out the parts of your life. If what I want is not enough, that would be the first question. Then you can start to say, okay, well, which part of my life right now am I most concerned with, or most excited about, where I have high emotion in? So is that my professional life, or is that my personal life as a starting point? And you kind of get an if-then kind of diagram here. And so you can go, okay, if it's my personal life, okay, well, great. Now I know, okay, what I want. My personal life is the most important thing to focus on right now. And then you can say, okay, which piece of my personal life? Is it my physical body health? Is it my mental health? Is it my emotional health? Is it my relationships? Is it my spousal relationships? Is it my relationship with my kids? Is it my spirituality, my contribution? And start to ask yourself those questions as we would dig deeper. And each time you ask yourself those questions, you're in dialogue with yourself to get a more detailed answer. That's how I would think about the prompts. Each question gets a little bit deeper in terms of the specificity, because in everything, of course, it's the specificity which gives us the clarity. And the clarity allows us to move into action. And so that's how I would think about it, right? So if you've got, okay, what do I want? Okay, it's my personal life. Okay, it's my marriage. Okay, well, what about your marriage? What about your marriage right now? And start to allow yourself to get more specific. Okay, well, where is it right now? And be really simplistic about it as a starting point. Okay, well, if your marriage is the thing that right now there's popping up into your mind the most, where would you put your marriage on a scale of 1 to 10? All right, it's a 6. All right. Okay, well, what does that 6 mean? And define it. Defining that specificity is really important. Then say, okay, well, what would an 8 look like? And then you can start to really understand, okay, what is my standard, meaning what does that 6 look like? And then you've defined the standard in that area. And then you can say, okay, what does arbitrarily an 8 look like to you, or a 9 or even a 10? Then you can create a new standard. Now you've got somewhere that you are actually defined and somewhere to actually go towards. And then it's just a case of putting a plan in place.
And one of the things that we actually do, I do this in our internal mastermind. I do this in some of the front row dad, like smaller masterminds that we're in. We do this rating system for ourselves. And one of those topics, an example, is thriving marriage. So I have one of these tomorrow, and I'm looking at my rating system. So our scale of 1 through 10 was created by Paul Galnick, fellow front row dad brother, and a 1. So sometimes we don't even know what a rating system is. So he created this. It was super helpful. He said a 1 is, I don't know how I got here. 2 is it eroded. It declined since the last month. 3, I stayed the same. 4, minimal progress. 5, I'm satisfied with gains. 6, content with gains. 7, happy with gains. 8, I'm humbled and grateful. 9, exceeded my expectations of what I thought was possible. And a 10 is I never could have imagined being here. So we rate ourselves 1 through 10 every month. And on those wealth and legacy, on vibrant health, on thriving marriage, intentional parenting, business evolution, and emotional intelligence. And then we just give ourselves a rating. And then why do we give ourselves that rating? And just at that simple check-in every month of just auditing where we're at compared to what we believe is our standard, using this word. So I really love this framework of what you're saying is, and sometimes the question pops up, it's like, well, if you give yourself a 6, great. Well, why do you give yourself a 6? Why not a 3? Why not a 2? And it's almost the reverse of drawing out, well, I'm doing a good job at this, I'm doing a good job at that. So that way we could stay in a positive, like more of the appreciation inquiry, keeping with the a higher energetic and a higher frequency with this, I am doing a good job here, coming back to that empathy piece. And then it's like, great, well, what might then go into, what might an 8 look like? What might a 7 look like? 1 point up, not a 10, but like a little bit better. What might that look like for this next month? So I really love this frame, Nick. Anything you want to piggyback on or add before I go in like a slightly different direction?
I would just underscore the fact that as a starting point, it does start with what do you want and then go deeper and deeper and deeper. And then how you can build on that is to do exactly what you just said, define what it means to you. And then you always have a framework to go back to. So you create much more speed. And so you can start to accelerate. It's not a one-off throwaway piece of work. It's something you can always build on. And to go back to the systems in our business to get to be better than rich, like creating those things allow us to build every single time. So I love that extension to it.
Great. Well, we're both Tony Robbins guys, RPM, the rapid planning method, results, purpose, and then massive action. I think too many entrepreneurs that listen to the show start with the massive action. It's like, I just got to go do. Sometimes they'll start with the result. It's like, I want to get this outcome. And it's like, let me go do it. Sometimes they forget to park with the why. What is the reason why this needs to get done? So how do you guide someone to get a little bit deeper in their purpose once they figure out, okay, this is my standard, but like, this is why this is meaningful to me before I go take these action steps. So in our example, we said a 6 is a marriage. What would an 8 look like? Oh, an 8 would look like if I did grocery shopping a little bit more. I took care of the kids a little bit more. I got her a massage a little bit more. I did all these things. Great. Let me just go do massive action and start doing it versus let me just question why. What would be the purpose behind giving her this? What would that actually, like you said, the meaning behind it? How might someone explore a little bit more depth and meaning into some of their decisions before they act on them?
I find, Mike, that this is one of the most polarizing, perhaps is not the right word, but if I find that this is a subject with my clients that tends to be something people understand, but also don't want to do the work on necessarily. And I think of it overall as the high level here as vision work. So yeah, why, meaning, purpose, all of those stuff is around, okay, what do you see this looking like? What does this actually look like? And I think about it from a team perspective. If you're you're running your business and you've got the people that are in your team, small, big, or medium, anything in between, your number one job as a leader is to lead, and you do that by creating the vision, which is the same thing as having that purpose and the meaning. And so that vision for your company is really a proxy for you, because if you're the owner, that's how it should look like. But everyone in their particular version of their life, like, you've got to go deeper to understand why we're doing this. Because most people, most of the time, like, what we're doing is we're thinking about, okay, here's where I am right now. What can I see forward? And that tends to be the default. And even if we do this every day, it's still the default for us. We have to be active in looking to starting with the end in mind, to quote Stephen Covey. We've got to look at what we're going to here. I just did a conversation yesterday with a financial advisor client of mine, and he has about 7 people in his producer group team. And he's seen he has great relationships with these people and all the guys in his team, and he can see all the things that they could do right now. And he's taking money investment in the team, and they're looking at bringing new resources in, which is going to create more value and scalability across the team and create more systems. Like, fantastic. But then he's having this problem where some people on the team don't quite get it or see the value of it right now. And so he's having to play all these different roles and speaking to these people individually or even as a team and dealing with these situations, because what he hasn't done, Mike, he hasn't created the vision for where they're going overall. And there's no agreement to this point that they're all moving towards. And therefore, it's so much more challenging to define whether this is a good thing to do or not, because it just becomes an argument about the situation right now rather than where are we going overall. Right. So that's an example for the team. And as an individual, it's the same process. If you don't know what the right thing is to do, it's because you don't know where you're going overall. It's like, to quote Tony Robbins, how can you possibly have a plan for your day if you haven't got a plan for your life?
With this audience of financial advisors, something that I have found that some of them, from doing some coaching and some work, and some of them have worked with us and using our services, they come up with, I don't want to say it's as an excuse, but maybe it's a limiting belief that they're restricted by a lot of the rules in what they're allowed to do, like compliance. So they sometimes don't like to try to innovate or think outside the box or adapt or adopt new philosophies, because it's like that compliance won't allow me to do that. Or, especially if they are fiduciary, especially if they have different contracts that are signed that limit them a little bit. So I know we're kind of getting into the weeds here, but some advisors do listen to the show and they hear some of this, and immediately they're putting it through this filter of what I'm allowed to do or not allowed to do. What would you say to that? Like, is there truth there, or is that a limiting belief, or like, how would you coach someone around just that frame and just that lens of, I'm filtering it through what I'm allowed to do due to a compliance before I act? Maybe that's a necessary thing, but I don't know if that's the case for every industry, but maybe it is for that. Can you speak to that?
I would say first starting point, I would celebrate that fact, because if you're in financial services or in other industries which are regulated in that same way, where there are barriers put up potentially to work in a certain way or to protect the consumer, I would celebrate the fact that that's the case. Why? Because it means most people are going to do what you just said, Mike, and make that the excuse or the limiting belief for why they're not following it through. And so the way I think about it is that if that is the situation, what it means is that there may be in totality less ways of doing something, but that creates a lot of more opportunity for innovation. And it creates a lot more opportunity to do the things that are still available, because most people are counting themselves out. We saw a little bit of this through the pandemic, where people will be more likely to kind of cower in the corner and say, I can't because of the pandemic. And so any given time, let's say there's 100 opportunities, and you've got everyone moving towards opportunities because they think everything's going well, the market's up, life is good, economy's going well. There's a lot more people moving to these 100 opportunities. When things aren't going so well, pandemic, or in your particular industry, if it's highly regulated, maybe there's less total opportunities. Maybe there's 80 instead of 100, or 60 instead of 100. But if there's 10,000 people going towards these opportunities, and in a good time, what you'll find is that, and it's a bad time, you're getting way below 50% going towards the opportunities. So maybe the total number of opportunities is down in your particular industry compared to another, But what you find is because of that, there's way less people going after them. So it's actually a better situation to be in if you feel like there's a compliance overview for your industry or there's some other restrictions in there. Again, it's back to raising the standards, because most people are going to go, oh, okay, here's an excuse. I can't do it. Oh, I won't do it. You have the opportunity to step into that to say, okay, wow, what is this potential constriction here allow me to innovate into? And I would suggest that there's really more than you could ever need.
So just to go into a specific real quick while we're here. Okay, let's say a specific, because this is one that we get pushed back on sometimes because it's like compliance won't allow me to do that. For example, like social media stuff. Okay. We want to have a digital presence to either recruit advisors from other firms, and I want to bring them over to being on my team, or I want to market my brand to other potential clients so they could see how cool I am and what it feels like working with me. But everything has to go through compliance as an example. So therefore, they put on this marketing hat, like, oh, I want to market, but then it doesn't fall under compliance. So I feel like I'm limited on what I'm able to do, because one of the advisors said, think back to 1997. That's about what we can do. So it's like, so what would you do for marketing in 1997 in 2024? And it's like, yeah, that seems a little limiting, and maybe even having this advisor maybe lose confidence on adapting and adopting innovation.
Right.
If there's truth to that, which it seems like there is, because I've heard it now from a dozen to 24 different advisors that we've done some work with. So what do you say to that person where it's specific? Like now we have a specific use case. There's a specific scenario. It's not like there's 16 possibilities out of 100. It's like, we're here. What counsel do you give to that advisor that maybe comes to your mastermind group and says, damn, I need to add more clients, or I need to build my downline, and like I'm super restricted right now. What is the tactical that you might encourage that person to do, or counsel that you might offer that person? Again, this might be behind the paywall stuff, but hey, I'm here to pull out of you what I can.
No, massive value always, Mike. Massive value. Well, I'd start with agreeing with them. Right? It's not a situation where I'm going to push back to say it's not true. It's like, well, okay, let's make sure that we are dealing with the facts, though. However, what actually is it true? Is it that because we tend to think in a binary fashion, either we can or we can't. But the reality is there might be restrictions. Okay, cool. I agree. What are actually the restrictions, and what actually is available? Because I can tell you right now, I've got multiple clients that are running their own podcasts, for instance, specific audience that they're leaning into, that are doing marketing or posts through different social media. So I know that there's something available. So, okay, well, what actually is available to us? And let's be clear about what the parameters are that we can act within, and act within those. The best study of life is what's real, rather than putting up, it's challenging enough as it is, rather than putting up that aren't real barriers. And so, like, one of the things that we would do in our groups here is get feedback from your peers. The best people to learn from are the people that are just right next to you. I always think about running a 100-meter race in the Olympics, and all those people, from 1 to 10 or whatever the number is that are running there. There's, all the spoil is going to go to the guy that wins the gold medal, and number 10 is not going to get any medals. But they're so close to you, and there's so much to learn from people that are close to you. And so one of the things we would do is say, well, how does this apply in your practice? And every single time, there's always something to share. We're doing this nuance a little bit different. And so I would agree for sure that there are nuances that's not available. Maybe it feels like 997, but let's get clear about what actually is true. What can't you do? What can you do? What are the possibilities? And then say, okay, how might we change the game here? How might we think outside the box? I had one advisor tell me recently that he actually gave up all of his licensing. And so the business is big enough and does it in different ways where he can be free to go out there and do his marketing in whatever way he wants, because he's not actually tied with any licensing. And so he'll have other ways of kind of bringing that business into his system. Now, the point is that you may not want to do that, you may not agree with that, but the point is that there's many ways of doing things. It's a starting point to say, what are you really committed to? Because when you're committed, you'll always find a way.
So, I mean, it's a good answer. We didn't necessarily get into the specifics that I wanted to, but it's okay because maybe we can't. Because it's the specifically you said, hey, he could start a podcast, which is good, right? Maybe he could guest on other people's podcasts. Maybe there's Facebook Lives. Like, am I able to go Facebook Live? I can't necessarily do my own Facebook Live, but can I go on somebody else's Facebook Live? It is like a podcast. Again, I don't know the industry well, but if we do want to market and we do want to advertise and brand ourselves as an authority of some way, we got to do what's right within our rights. And I think that's obviously specific to advisors, but I think there's like real estate agents that might follow the show. And it's like, oh, well, if I don't answer the phone, then I'm going to lose clients. It's like, there's probably some truth to that, but it's like, how do we, what's right, what's in our right? What can we do to offset some of these things? So seems like maybe I struck something there. Anything you would want to add to that?
Yeah, you're right. There's always a way. I mean, the podcast is a great example because you could go out and say, again, it comes back to what's my specific outcome in that area, right? Because we could arbitrarily say, oh, it's not available, I can't go down that road, right? But fine, all right, that's a cop out. But you could say, okay, what am I trying to get to? How am I trying to build my practice in this area? Is it that I'm focused on a particular client set? Am I clear about what my ideal client is? Who are those particular clients? And if you know that that's the area that you can serve, you can say, okay, how can I add value to that set of people? Rather than thinking about the question of how can I market? Oh, I can't market. There's restrictions through compliance. Throw that belief away and say, like, who am I really trying to add value to? And how could I add value to them? Right. That podcast example was a real one. Was a set of advisors were saying, okay, here's the particular avatar that I want to service, and we're gonna talk about in our podcast how I can particularly serve those people. And I know that it's true that you can get out there on social media in certain ways. Maybe you take it to compliance and say, okay, here's my plan for the next year. What will you sign off? What won't you sign off on? What works? What doesn't work? What are you doing to build relationships within the compliance department so you get a good feedback loop and get that communication open? Right? These are all opportunities for you to get out there and get the most that you want from your business, and whatever way that is. Tactically, there's always a way. And here's the thing to think about, Mike, and remind anyone who's listening and watching in this, is that we will always come back to how can I do something? And it is really important to have a good strategy. But if you don't believe that you will execute on it, or it's not right for you, or it's good for someone else but not for me, it doesn't matter what the strategy is. And so it's got to be a combination of those two. Yes, we want good strategy. Yes, it's important. And you also got to start from a place of like, I'll do what it takes to get there as well. So those are some of the specificities, but it comes from that certainty as a starting point.
If there were items that you executed and implemented or do for yourself, for your business, or you did in your past as you were doing independent, as you're building your mastermind groups, as you're counseling and coaching right now, or when you were doing the 20 years with Tony, like whatever you were doing in the corporate world, like what were some of these specific examples that you did? Maybe it's habits or choices that you're like, these were foundational for me in my relationship, in my marriage, as a husband, as a father, as a business owner, as a leader. These were like paramount for me over the course of my life. And then maybe like some mistakes, maybe some pitfalls, maybe some like, I would have loved to have these standards back then, but man, these were some misses for me, learning moments. What are some things that maybe the listener can pull from your examples and then some of your warnings? What would you say to that?
What jumps out directly for me is if I think back to my early days working in finance, working for big banks, specifically being in London. I remember I was in a place where I was very excited to do what I was doing. I was working on a big trading floor. It was like, had a lot of energy, Mike. I loved that. Like really thrived in that energy and the urgency and the specificity. And every move you make costs money or makes money. And I remember that I loved that environment. But I also remember that I was on the one side, I had a lot of certainty about doing what I was doing. But I was really challenged by living in the uncertainty of putting myself out there. So specifically what I'm talking about here is, I knew that I wanted to move into a real direct trading role. That's where I loved those people. I really revered those people. I knew that there was a lot of upside there, and I thought I could be great at it. But for multiple years, I'm talking 3, 4 years, 5 years perhaps, I prevented myself from just having a simple conversation about going after the thing that I knew I wanted. And all I got myself to do in the end was to send one simple little email to say to the guy that I really wanted to work for, to say, I want to do this. Would you have me? And it was so It was so just on the outside. Can you do me a favor? Would it be all right? And I look back on that now, and it's just so far away from who I am. Because so the standard I'd like to offer here as a share is to say is like you've got to be bold in your approach. You've got to be bold in your approach, and that would be definitely a misstep for me to say like it's not something I really went after, even though it's something I really want. And it comes from fear of course, of being rejected, comes from fear of failure. But ultimately, like leaning into that is what allows you to grow. And so it's the flip side of those things. And so I got to a point where in my life, I'll be following opportunities. So here's how I flipped the standard or upgraded the standard here is that I would pride myself, Mike, in following opportunities in my financial services career. And I would be the guy that would take opportunities that no one else wanted, which put me in a place to have a lot of upside. And it worked well up to a point. But I realized I was just following other people's opportunities. Then I made the switch, and I spent 2 years living in the Philippines. It was a very interesting time for me. It wasn't what I expected. It was like a lonely time. There wasn't really anyone around, and I had a lot of time with my thoughts. And I thought I'd get there, I'd be just working out and get things back on track. And it was a really interesting time for me to think and deep about like what I want, what life is about. And that's where really when I started my personal development journey. And I started to understand that rather than going after opportunities, I need to create the opportunities that I want. I've got to create the person that I want to be. I've got to create the outcomes I want to go to. Now, I can't define exactly what it's going to look like or if I'm going to get the thing exactly what I want, but I've got to head towards that journey. I've got to head towards that vision. And that would be a big distinction for me to share in the way that we're working in life. So I'd say, like, again, back to the example, whatever you think that you're putting barriers up in front of you, is just that. It's just you're doing the barriers rather than like what actually are the barriers. So I would say, we've got back to meaning and purpose here, Mike. I found that people would tell me that you should go look for your purpose, and I found that really challenging to do anything with. And the switch in the language, which is subtle, was just to go create the purpose or create the thing that you want. Now that can be applied holistically, or it can also be applied very tactically. If you look at your business and the system that you want, it's like, okay, here's my problem. Well, what's the best way this could happen? If you could have it any way you want it, what would you create here? And put that into practice.
Yeah, I think it's the imagination can create things, but you created the sacred space for the imagination to exist. So even though it was a lonely time, you had the opportunity for imagination to exist. And too often, we are settling into reaction and distraction mode as business owners, as humans, that we don't even create the space for these beautiful thoughts to actually show up for us because we're constantly numbing them. So I think that in itself is a really great takeaway for someone listening to say, how do I protect sacred space where creativity could exist, where imagination could exist? What is that block time in my schedule where it's like zero interruptions, no reaction mode, no distractions that show up? So it's a great reminder. Nick, is there anything before we like to ask every guest 3 questions? Is there anything we didn't hit on? Anything that you like to talk about? Anything that you think that is a relevant conversation topic, or any direction that we didn't go that you'd want to go before we start gearing towards the exits with our final 3 questions, and then giving our audience a chance to stay in touch with you? Anything that we didn't capture today that you really want to make sure we hit on?
I would like to share around the part in my life this year where I'm pushing the standard the most. And that is a mini sabbatical that I'm doing this year. And I'm so excited about this and so scared about it at the same time because of what it could mean for my business and for my life. And again, I want it to be an example. You talked about warnings and examples, right? That's what people are, either of those 2 things. And so I want it to be the example to say what could be not just what's the best version of what you can think about. And back to your scale, right? You could, as you were showing your scale there, 1 through 10, I thought as you were getting to I thought it was going to be a 5 scale. But it's a 10 scale because there's so much more nuance in those things that are available, because people tend to stop at the things that they think that they could get to. Oh, I could see that there's a big opportunity to expand my business from $1 million in revenue to $2 million in revenue. But they're not thinking about, not necessarily thinking about, okay, what would a 10 million version look like? What would a 20 million version look like? And here's the crazy piece about this is that it's not any more difficult to think in terms of 20 million versus that 1 million than it is necessary to think that 2 million in terms of that 1 million. And so I'm offering here an expansion of the standard outside of what you think is possible within the place that you're working in right now. And so for me, that this is this sabbatical. And my brief to myself here, Mike, for this year is that I'm taking off all of August. So I'll be back after Labor Day. And that time will be no delivery to clients that I work with. And that time will be about making me better in all parts of my life. We take ourselves wherever we go. And so the brief is, how do I make this time more powerful for me from my family's relationship, from my business relationships, and for me just as a person intrinsically, but also make it more valuable for my clients while I'm not there, such that they can take additional value from not being there, and also be even more valuable when I come back and integrate back in as well. And that's the standard that I'm putting out there, and I'm really excited to share, and also scared to share because of it's scary because it's out there on the edge. Right, I'm on the edge laying those bricks, and I could fall off. So I really want to share that because I'm putting together some content around that as well. I want to share my journey. I want to document it. I want to offer people opportunities to lean into it, perhaps do their own version of it. And it's going to be a big part of my exploration this year.
Well, it's a great share, and you trigger a curiosity I think some business owners might be asking, which is, what are the systems and who are the who's that you're going to be having in place in order to make sure there's predictability for the 30 days that you're absent? And I know that's something that I've talked about because I went on a 3-week road trip without technology last summer and still yielded 12K in profits, and without me being on technology and still making sure that things were in place. So is there anything that we're recording this in April? You have all of May, June, July. You got essentially call it 100 days to install systems and who's. What does that look like? Are you going out hiring a bunch of team, or do you already have this team already installed? Do you have to build some systems, or do you have these installed? Just curious on the tactical there, and then we can shift into the 3 final questions.
Here's a shift that I made in the last few months. I've had a couple of different assistants over the years, and I know that this is a sweet spot for you as well. And they've never really got to a place where I've given them enough support, or they've really stepped into what I want. And so I started to think about it. It's like, I don't need an assistant. I need a COO. And I need someone to think about the strategy in the business, maybe do wear the hat of some of the executive assistant types role as well. And so I removed the team that I had and installed, or in the middle of installing a new team. So I removed a VA and installed a director of operations instead. And so thinking about that, she's my primary who for setting up the strategy. Now we've set up a system where she's doing that, her primary delivery is going to be that, and she's going to get compensated based on the delivery of setting that up. Those systems across that next 100 days, you said its timing's really, really good. The first real communication is due to go out on the 1st of May. And also going to utilize the team of coaches that I have as well to be able to step in for my clients should they need to in that time as well. So yes, I'm in the mix of leveraging the right who's, sharing the message, enrolling people. Essentially, this goes back to what we were saying before around the meaning and the purpose. I'm enrolling people in my vision of what this actually is. I'm not just saying I'm going to do a sabbatical, can you help? I'm saying this is why I'm doing it, and this is why I'm passionate about doing it, because this is what I think. This is what I think is so important. Does that do anything for you? Is there anything part of that which you can attach yourself to in terms of your vision, and you want to be part of it, that you can share some of my passion here? So yes, I'm in the mix of doing that right now, Mike. I'm very excited about how that looks, but definitely a team of coaches that I'm working with here, my new director of operations, and we're going to use a couple of different technology systems that are going to leverage my email list and different applications to put out there. But yes, we're in the process of doing that right now. And it's also going to be a big lift in the business overall, because I imagine there's going to be some real depth of opportunity that comes out of it that I can't see right now. Going to have some evergreen content I can share based on it as well. Yeah, it's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And one of the things, by the way, I asked this because when I did mine, people asked me because I was still active on Facebook. I was still active on my email. I was still my profile was still actively messaging people and responding to people. They're like, you announced you're taking this 3-week time frame, but yet you're still active on these social medias. So I installed my virtual assistants with my AI tone to be like messaging and emailing and responding and commenting as me. So nothing stopped. In fact, most people in my life didn't even feel like I was gone because I put the who's and the systems and the communications and everything in place. So all the marketing and the sales still was able to still exist. And the fulfillment of my clients, like with them, well, obviously I met with them before and after. So I didn't have, I had my business partner kind of support me there. But again, having the who's and having the systems were really good because I didn't want to come back from the 3 weeks and like have no sales, no calls, no clients, no marketing. I've had trips like that in the past where it's like, I compromised 30 days and then I come back to my business and it wasn't 30 days back then. It might've been 7, maybe even 4. And then, the business is suffering because of my absence. So, Nick, we like to ask every guest 3 questions. And then we obviously want to hear a little bit more about how we can stay in touch with you before we close out. The first question we like to ask every guest is, what do you think the world needs most today?
I got to tie into all the things we've been talking about here, and that's part of a big part of what you do. But it's the freedom of time is the immediate piece, right? People are thinking that they want financial freedom, but really they think they want financial freedom to have time freedom. So we need to give ourselves the gift of having the right time and the space. We touched on a little bit earlier about being bombarded with the things that are happening in our life. And I think as business owners, it's our responsibility to lead the charge in this stuff because we have so much impact for the people that work in our teams, our families, and our clients or customers to put ourselves in that spot and really protect our time. So what does that look like? It tactically can look like just making sure you get at least 20 minutes a day where there's potential that you could get bored. And that might just be as simple as your journaling time in the morning, and just sitting yourself in the office with a cup of coffee and no outside stimuli. Those stuff, to your point earlier, Mike, is where the imagination starts to be able to let go. So it's the protection of time is what we need the most. The opportunity to do that on an individual basis is going to create so much more upside.
Next question, Nick, is what are 1 to 2 or maybe 3 books that you think people should read?
Well, for me, and you mentioned Who Not How earlier, the 3 books by Ben Hardy and Dan Sullivan have been such an impact in the last 6 to 9 months of my life here. And I love anything to do with personal development, so I'm always inhaling books, mostly through audio listening, and those 3 books I've had on rotation. So there's so much I can implement from those 3 books, Who Not How, Gap in the Gain, and 10X is Easier Than 2X. I'm actually just going those on rotation. And I said, I'm going to do that until the end of Q2 because there's so much value. And so here's what I'd offer here, that I definitely recommend those 3 books. But what I would like to offer to people tactically is to say, whatever you think there's a great resource. When was the last book that you read or listened to or even podcast that you really loved? Go back and get into it with much more depth, much more precision. It's kind of like the sun. The sun, we know, heats the earth. It's an amazing thing. It gives us life. But if we can take that power of the sun and we put it under a magnifying glass, we can set things on fire. And so if you get deeper into the things that you resonate with, there's so much more nuance that is not available. It's like if you want to go fishing for big fish, you've got to go deep. You can't just be on the surface. And so those are the 3 books I recommend, but the concept is more important there, is to go deep and what resonates for you.
Yeah, it's great. I was recommended to listen to Andrew Huberman's podcast with Dr. Becky Kennedy, and it's so like rich. Oh my gosh. So I listened to it. It's like 3 hours. And then I just went back and now I have taking notes on her concepts on being sturdy and boundaries and, a lot of what she talks about. Like, it's just so good. So to your point, I could even be better at that. And it's an example of me implementing what you just said, because I'm guilty of like, let me just devour stuff. And then it's like, let me actually go back and like actually digest it a little bit more. So great piece of wisdom there, Nick. Last question we'd like to ask is, what does it mean to you to be better than rich?
it really resonates with me because for my version of this is what I call the diamond of success. Now, it's purposely corny so you remember it, but I think the 4 points of this diamond are business or profession at the top. We're in no particular order: business, profession, your relationships, like the most important parts of your life, your health, which is physical, emotional, and mental, and then your contribution. What can you give back? And those are the 4 areas that most things in our life, everything else in life, kind of rolls up into those 4. And so the goal would be to keep the diamond shape integral, and to make sure that each of those focuses in each of those areas are complementary to others. That for me is better than rich. That is saying that when I'm working in my business, I should be working on goals in my business which allow me to have deeper relationships with my wife, which allows me to go spend time working on my physical body, which in turn then allows me to give more back to my community, whatever that might mean. And here's an example specifically for that. Like a few months ago, I was working on my latest version of Wow Box that I send out to clients. So I'll send them something, I'll start working with them, or things to use as we, physically use as we work together. And that's not necessarily my jam. It's more challenging for me to work in that space. But my wife is great at that. So on a Saturday morning, we went to the gym. Our 2 girls, 3 and 7, they like to go to the kids academy they have there. Me and Christine, my wife, did a yoga class. And afterwards, we're sitting in the cafe and we're working on this Wow Box idea. And I thought that, in essence, is exactly what this diamond is about. This is what Better Than Rich to me is about, is working on your business in a way that you're working on your most important relationships, that you're working on your body and your other parts of your health, so that you can create more and give back more. The opposite of that is where I think most people are, is that, oh man, if I push harder in my business, then I realize that there's going to impact my relationships. And then some way you kind of take your foot off the gas in your business because you don't want to impact your relationships. And then you end up resenting some of your relationships because of what it meant for you, right? So I think you can have your cake and eat it too. In fact, that's the only way to do it, making it sustainable for the future. And that's what it means to me.
It's great. Nick, Coach Nick, I'm sure people are going to want to stay in touch with you. I know you have a mastermind group that you have, and I know you're helping a lot of people in the marketplace right now. Where can people stay in touch? Where could they learn more about, who your group is for, what you offer within that group, or just if they want to stay in touch?
Well, you can get me on LinkedIn. Is probably the best way right now. Nicholas Davies on LinkedIn. You go to proadvisorcoach.com as well to find out some more about me. And to your point earlier about doing your 3 weeks away and people didn't know that you were there, what people are going to find with me is when I'm away, you're going to actually see more of me, right? So that's going to be more. So there's going to be more of that stuff to come. But for now, you can go to proadvisorcoach.com. You can get in touch with me through that or on LinkedIn, Nicholas Davies on LinkedIn.
And that's proadvisorcoach.com. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. Proadvisorcoach.com.
And is this for any specific person in general, or is it?
Yeah, you'll be able to go straight on there and see my profile. I'll suggest go there as well.
It's great. I'm looking at the site right now.
Yeah,
everyone. I encourage you. It says join our newsletter. They could sign up. Free, valuable content and resources from Nick right there on his site. There looks like there's a video on here of The Tyranny of Urgent by Coach Rich Camp. So schedule a free consultation. Yeah, listener, take him up on it. Go to the site, check it out. Coach Nick, thank you so much for your wisdom today. We really appreciate it. And listener, just a few housekeeping items. When you're listening to this, more than likely, I myself and Andrew Biggs, my business partner, are hosting virtual install summits right now. Those are probably popping up on your feed. You're probably hearing a little bit about these. I just finished up a live install event here in St. Augustine with our top tier clients for our owner circle. And the whole concept is it's not information, it's not education, it's implementation. So it's very much building a system or a process, installing it into your business, and then it's done. So I'm going to be doing virtual versions of these over the course of really Q2 and Q3. So just keep an eye open for these. Most of these are going to be free, if not low cost, because I want to make sure that business owners are not being bombarded with so much information that the marketplace is giving you. I actually want you to learn something, install it, implement it, and then it's done. So whether there be like your writing style that you can offload, or a nurture sequence for your social media, or getting you on podcasts with a predictable sequence, or having your inbox completely managed for you, or your LinkedIn completely handled, your content calendar completely handled. So I want to make sure it's like, learn it, install it, implement it, and then it's done. It's completely offloaded. And that's what these install events are doing. So thank you so much for your listenership, your viewership, your support for the show. Until next week, as always, leave today better than you found it. We'll see you next time under the Better Than Rich Show. Cheers.